Now let's focus for a while on Maurice Strong and his incredible impact on the planetary scale green and clean agenda. And let's get straight down to business with a short video from Achim Steiner, UN Under-Secretary General, with a very similar statement to the one that he made to the opening plenary of the Paris Climate COP, just 3 days after Maurice's death in 2015, remembering a man he called one of the world's greats.
Maurice convened the first ever international expert group meeting on climate change, a clear demonstration of how he was way ahead of the curve. He shepherded in a range of vital global environmental governance processes, from the original Rio Earth Summit, Agenda 21 and the Rio Declaration, to the launch of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity. Crucially, Maurice ensured the full participation of developing countries in these processes that included listening closely to those who were feeling marginalized, as well as indigenous people and those who were the poor in the world. He was also a champion of nature-based solutions. He always saw the human species as part of the greater natural whole. He always identified the incredible capacity of nature to provide answers that even the most sophisticated technology and science still cannot match to this day. It is also very welcome to see that leaders of the travel and tourism industry are getting behind the SunX initiative and are committing to climate-friendly travel, helping us to meet our climate goals. This is a step that I believe Maurice Strong would have welcomed. Maurice will be forever remembered for placing the environment on top of the international agenda at the heart of development, with people and the planet being an integral part of that agenda. His courage, his entrepreneurship, his brilliance will continue to inspire me personally, and I know many generations to come. It is on his legacy that many of us are building today, with the hope that we can address the great challenges of the 21st century with the pioneering work that he was so much part of.
And now we can listen to Maurice himself, talking to BBC back in 1972 about the climate crisis.
It has become apparent that today man's own activities have reached the scale where they are the principal determinants of his own future. For example, we are now today effecting more changes in the composition of the atmosphere, in the composition of the waters of the world, and even the composition of certain elements in our food chain. We're making more of these changes in one generation that have been made in millions of years of human evolution. We don't know exactly what will be the ultimate impact of these changes, but we do know that many of them are irreversible, and many of them could be decisive in their effects on man's future. This question is not a matter of one man or one group of people's predictions. It's a matter of the fact that an increasing number of very serious-minded scientists have produced evidence from a whole series of events, many of them the well-known pollution or environmental problems that have come to our attention, that the natural world in which man lives and on which he depends is indeed deteriorating, is being destroyed in many instances at a rate that is accelerating, and that can only continue to accelerate unless we begin to control the activities that are having this destructive impact. I believe that the nations of the world themselves are impressed with the evidence that we have amassed that suggests that we must adopt a much more cooperative attitude towards our dealing with this problem, that Stockholm must usher in a new era of international cooperation. And I believe the governments will go to Stockholm with an overriding sense of the importance of achieving consensus on at least a large percentage of these proposals.
And I'm sure you will agree that this shows the incredible vision of the man in singling out climate change as the global challenge half a century before it was a popular issue. And we'll hear a little bit more on this from Felix Dodds, another one of Strong's disciples. Felix is a co-founder of SunX, and a co-author with Strong of Only One Earth.
I always thought that Morris was a unique individual, someone who cared deeply about the people, and particularly those who were more vulnerable than others. But in his life, he gained such a unique perspective. He had worked as an oil and businessman in Canada, the United States, and Kenya. He helped establish many non-government organizations and sat on the boards of many other NGOs. He'd interned at the UN as a 17-year-old in the PASS office and helped UN security. He came back at 32 as the UN Under-Secretary General for the first UN conference on the environment held in Stockholm in 1972. Morris was ahead of his time in so many areas, climate change being one of the most obvious and relevant to today's conference. An outcome from the 1972 conference was the establishment of the United Nations Environment Programme, of which he would become the first executive director. In 1990, he was asked by the Secretary General of the UN to be the head of the Rio Earth Summit, which would happen 20 years after the Stockholm conference. In his career, he would eventually be appointed by different Secretary Generals 7 times to the post of Under-Secretary General. I wanted to focus on one of his greatest achievements, and that was the shepherding of the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. The core text, Agenda 21, a 40-chapter blueprint for how to approach the 21st century. It covered social, economic, and environmental sections, as well as for the first time recognizing 9 stakeholders in society. This included industry and non-government organizations, but it also gave a unique space for young people, for indigenous peoples, and for women. The idea of stakeholder has had a huge impact as a concept, whether it's in the international negotiating processes, or it's at the national level, or at the local, or at the community level. The idea of stakeholders can be traced back to Agenda 21 and to Morris Strong. The second main outcome was meant to be an Earth Charter, but that didn't happen. But still a very important document was negotiated, the Rio Declaration. 27 principles, such as the polluter pays principle, the principle of prior informed consent, the right to development, common but differentiated responsibility, have found their way into international treaties and also into national law. So played a really important role in the last 30 years or 20 years. The third and the fourth outcomes were the 2 conventions on biological diversity and climate change. Finally, I had the pleasure of working on what would be Morris's final contribution to a book, Only One Earth, which takes the reader from the 1960s to the Rio +20 summit in 2012. Underlying this book and the work of Morris and his unique network of stakeholders is the recognition that thinking globally and acting locally isn't enough. We need to think and act at all levels and in all aspects of our lives if we are going to live sustainably on this only one earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felix. And now we're going to hear from Jingfeng Zhu, the Secretary General of CBC GDF in Beijing. CBC GDF is the China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation, and it's one of the most active and significant organizations of its kind in China. China is a place where Morris Strong spent much of the latter years of his life, and he firmly believed that China would be a key to dealing with the climate crisis and to taking a global leadership role in this respect. Jinfeng.
This April 29th, is the 93rd anniversary of Mr. Maurice Frederick Strong's birthday. We are here to celebrate, to remember, to learn, to continue our journey started by Maurice Strong and for a better world, for a sustainable future. In 19th of last century, Maurice came to me firstly for Global Compact. He is promoting Global Compact to China. And at that time, some Chinese thought Global Compact is rich countries' club. But Maurice told me Global Compact is all countries' club. All enterprises must follow certain new regulations, new guidance to do their business. That is for the sustainable world. We must do that way. Starting that time, we work very closely, and I learn a lot. We learn a lot from him. Not only Stockholm, Real Earth Summit. In this year, we attend the UN headquarters at New York, preparing for the Stockholm Plus 50 conference. We are not here for the conference. We're not here to remember him. We must continue his journey. And the UNEP was started by Maurice Strong 50 years ago. And this year in China, we are organizing some small workshops to remember him, to learn, to study what we should do for further. We are preparing for UNEA 5, and we want to include as much as important information to remind us from early lectures by Maurice Strong. And thanks to Jeffrey, we have now SunX Strong Universal Network. This is a great initiative. Our foundation from China, work very closely with SunX. We want to promote sustainable, we want to promote the shared future for all human beings, for all lives in the planet. And the Green Growth set it up by Maurice, Jeffrey, Felix, and we will continue to work on this. Biodiversity is also a very important part started by Maurice in 19th of last century. Of course, we all know the result is not good enough. None of the recent tasks are accomplished by us. We need a more profound, more ambitious goal to accomplish, because there is no time for us. We need speed up. Dear Maurice, we are here to follow your guidance, and we are here to achieve what you wish about a sustainable world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jin Feng. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, and an even greater pleasure to work with you. And I look forward to a lot more collaboration going forward. Thank you again. And next, a word from 3 colleagues whose organizations are providing mementos of this event for the 2nd year in a row, and we're very grateful to them. First, Professor Arthur Dahl, on behalf of ECPD, the European Centre for Peace and Development, who are giving a copy of their legacy book, Remembering Maurice F. Strong, electronically to all of you. Then Miriam Villela, Executive Director of the Earth Charter Institute in Costa Rica, established by Maurice Strong, who will provide an electronic copy of the Earth Charter to attendees. And I would urge you to really carefully study the Earth Charter. It contains so much which is relevant to today's world. And finally, in this segment, Jocelyn Favre-Bula, from our partner Les Roches Hospitality College in Switzerland, talking about the Strong Earth Awards we are giving together to those students who write an essay on the relevance of the Earth Charter in today's world.
I first saw Maurice Strong in action at the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm, Sweden, in 1972, which Maurice organized and was its Secretary General. It launched the international environment movement. Later, when I was Deputy Director of Oceans and Coastal Areas at UNEP, Maurice asked for my secondment to his secretariat for the 1992 United Nations Conference on Environment and Development to help draft Agenda 21, the action plan from the Rio Earth Summit, and in particular its chapter on oceans, coasts, and small islands. I last saw Maurice at the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012. ECPD has published a wonderful book, Remembering Maurice Strong, full of recollections from many of those who worked with him. And we are providing all of you with electronic copies so that you too can be inspired by Maurice's example and perhaps follow in his footsteps to make the world a more just and sustainable place for everyone.
Warm greetings from the Earth Charter International Secretariat and our Education Center that is located here on the campus of the University for Peace in Costa Rica. I'm very happy to join this event today, the Strong Earth Youth Summit. I trust the Strong Earth Charter Awards will spark imagination and creativity of many, as well as significant future collaboration. Mr. Strong was someone who really understood the importance to work collaboratively across generations, across cultures and areas of knowledge, and who clearly visualized that collaboration requires the capacity to respect and care for others, and also the ability to communicate well. He had that kind of exceptional leadership that was able to engage people from around the world, to join efforts and collaborate for a global social betterment. He had the art of articulating shared vision and global collaboration. I would say a real model of a 21st century leader. I can say this because I had the opportunity to follow his footsteps from very close in different stages or agendas. First, in the organization of the 92 Earth Summit, then in his efforts to organize what he called the unfinished business of the Earth Summit with the Earth Charter Initiative and the space to empower and articulate the work of various actors of society, civil society, youth, business, through the Earth Council. And then finally in his efforts to revitalize the University for Peace, which was established by the United Nations over 40 years ago. As for the work to move forward with the idea of the Earth Charter, the vision was to craft in one document the values and principles that could guide humanity towards a more just, sustainable and peaceful world. Therefore, in 1994, Mr. Strong joined efforts with Mikhail Gorbachev, and together they launched a process to ensure that the Earth Charter would be drafted through a broad participatory consultation process that would bring together the voices of diverse cultures from all regions or all main regions of the world. And so that's what happened. The Earth Charter was then launched in the year 2000, is actually the result of a worldwide multicultural, multi-sectoral dialogue and consultation process to identify common shared values that could guide humanity towards a more just, sustainable and peaceful world. However, he and many others involved in this did not want that process to stop there, just as a document, but they envisioned the Earth Charter being used as an ethical reference for decision-making, being used as an ethical compass, and above all, as an educational instrument. Therefore, for the past 20 years, we have been working to implement that vision, especially in engaging, empowering, and educating young people from all around the world to be ethical leaders, committed to sustainability and committed to making this world a better place. Through our education center, the Earth Charter Center for Education for Sustainable Development, and our UNESCO chair that we coordinate here, we implement a Young Leaders program through a 10-week leadership, sustainability and ethics course that is engaging young people that are between 18 and 30 years old from around the world. And with this effort, we seek to expand young people's vision and consciousness regarding our interconnectedness and our interdependence with the large living world, our interdependence with the community of life, and also regarding how we ought to relate to one another in the large living world. I trust this effort of launching the Strong Earth Charter Award. It will spark, hopefully, the imagination and interest of many to use the Earth Charter in many different ways and to work together in this effort of turning our conscience on the fact that we are one Earth community with one common destiny into action. Thank you very much.
At Les Roches, our mission is to nurture future leaders who will disrupt tomorrow's hospitality industry through innovation and sustainable solutions. We encourage not only our students, but our entire community to think outside the box and to be fearless when it comes to making change for good. It is my pleasure to announce that together with Sunex, Les Roches will be sponsoring 10 awards, and that Professor Jeffrey Littman and myself will be announcing these winners during the festival later this year.
I want to close out this session by taking a look at the impact that Maurice Strong had, very well described by Achim Steiner, but over a 25 to 35 year period between 1970 and 2015 when he died. And just to get a feel for the institutional framework that he put into place. If you look at the bottom left of this slide, you see that in 1972, Maurice was the first Secretary General of the first Earth Summit, and an event he was called in to help save because it looked as though there was going to be an incredible clash between the group of 77 developing states led by India and the industrialized world, the OECD states, if you will. Maurice rescued that summit. He made this visit to India to see Madam Gandhi, who was then the recognized leader of the group of 77. And he persuaded her, as I've discussed in an earlier session, to attend that summit. And her attendance, and she was perhaps the only head of state present in Stockholm, that made the summit successful. And Maurice was able to broker the first set of agreements between the developed and the developing countries on the issue of the environment, and that incorporated at the time climate change. Immediately following that summit, the UN established its environment program in Nairobi in Kenya, UNEP, and Maurice went out there and became its first executive director. And he stayed there for several more years, crafting the activities of UNEP to become, in fact, an environment agency for the UN. And if you move forward along this timeline and you see 1992, Maurice's work hadn't stopped. He was instrumental in a whole series of high-level initiatives which culminated in the second Earth Summit in Rio, and that became really known as the Earth Summit. And it was based on a concept which he helped launch in the Brundtland Commission. Gro Harlem Brundtland, the former Prime Minister of Norway, was asked by the UN Secretary General to define sustainable development. And Morris was involved as one of the commissioners in her activity. And that was when they came up with the concept, which has persisted to this day, as a development that leaves the earth in the same state for our children as we found it in, basically. Arising from the Earth Summit in Rio, apart from the Rio Declaration, which set out a whole range of programmatic activities to support the concept of sustainable development, there were conventions on climate, on desertification, a whole host of children, if you like, of the Rio Earth Summit, which Morris put into place. The IPCC, actually, he helped create from the World Meteorological Organization and the UN Environment Programme back in 1988, a science-based independent program to try to give some clear statistical indication on the economics of climate change and the impacts of climate change, and to do it in a way that would give policymakers some clear guidance, because otherwise there were a plethora, a whole range of studies being funded by advocacy people and by fossil fuel companies, academic institutions at that time trying to calculate the impact. And the IPCC cut through all of this and produced a science-based, deliberately created activity to feed into the summit. The summit produced Agenda 21, which was, if you like, a roadmap for the 21st century. And I know at Rio, in the final stages, I met Morris in a corridor. I was then president of the World Travel and Tourism Council. And I asked him, what can we do to get over this message and messages coming out of Rio to the important travel and tourism sector? And Morris said to me, you should do an Agenda 21 for travel and tourism. And that's exactly what I did. I went back, I got hold of an old friend who's dead now, a Professor Victor Middleton, and a bright young academic working with him. And we developed this program relating the issues raised in Agenda 21 back to travel and tourism. The academic Rebecca Hawkins did an enormous amount of research to make those linkages. And when we produced the final documents, I think it was around 1993, 94, I then went to the UNWTO and back to Morris at his Earth Council, and I asked him, would you join us in delivering this document and in promoting it around the world? And both UNWTO and the Earth Council agreed to become co-authors of the document. And we then went to regional meetings in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, promoting the findings of that document. And I have to say, I was very pleased when later Morris told me at some stage that this was the best articulation of Agenda 21 by any sector that he had seen. And then at the bottom of this list, you see the Earth Charter. You heard from Miriam Villela, who's been a confidant, who was a confidant of Morris for many years, and is now leading the Earth Council and the Earth Charter Institute in Costa Rica, how this was an effort by Morris to pick up the unfinished business of Rio. Because at these international conferences, there are so many items on the agenda coming from all countries in the world, and only so many of them make it through to the final documents. And Morris had a whole range of issues that he considered to be important. And at that stage, he was occupying premises in a nice chateau in Geneva. I went there several times. And also in that same grounds was the headquarters of the Green Cross organization, an environmental initiative that Mikhail Gorbachev had set up after he was ousted as president of the USSR, as it then was, which is today's Russia, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And Gorbachev and Strong decided to collaborate on the Earth Charter, and they in fact introduced it together. They had the strong support of the government of Costa Rica, Jose Maria Figueras, the brother of Christiana Figueras of the UNFCCC, good friend of mine, and also of Ruud Lubbers, who was at that stage the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. And they created the Earth Charter. I've said it elsewhere, and I repeat it here. It is imperative that you download the Earth Charter and that you look at it and that you come to terms with its issues, its approaches, and the direction it's trying to set out for the planet. And that took us basically through to 2000, 2005. In 2000, the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, were created. The MDGs had many of the outcomes from Rio grafted into them. The issue around the MDGs is that it was a charter for the world's poorest countries. It was focused on reducing or eliminating poverty and making sure that no state was left behind. And the MDGs had a target of 2015. They were developed in a variety of organizations, the World Bank, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, the UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, UNEP. Many of these UN institutions picked up on the MDGs with their targets of reducing poverty for those people who were earning less than $1 a day by 2015. And it was a hugely successful program because in so many countries, it succeeded in raising the income levels of the world's poorest countries. And when 2015 came around, when the targets had been realized, the UN system created, and Morris was again, his hand was in this, the SDGs. And the SDGs picked up on where the MDGs left off. Instead of having 9 targets focused on developing countries, it had 17 goals focused on everybody. That's the basic distinction between the MDGs and the SDGs, was the SDGs went beyond poverty and covered all aspects of human life on the planet, And they didn't just deal with solving problems for the world's poorest countries, but they also focused on the developed countries as well. And at the same time, of course, the COPs of the UNFCCC had been continuing since the mid-90s. I think we're up to COP 15. COP 15 might have been Copenhagen in 2009. That was deemed to be a failure because the American and the Chinese came very close to reaching an understanding on how to deal with climate change, but failed to do it at the last moment, and the conference more or less collapsed. But the next year at COP 16 in Mexico, President Felipe Calderon, with whom I'm working at the moment in Saudi Arabia, who's an incredible human being, picked up the mantle and as Jeffrey Sachs said the other day in Riyadh, put the UNFCCC initiatives back on track. So that by 2015, at I think it was COP21, we concluded with the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, the Paris Climate Agreement, it's an interesting element of it, was that it didn't talk about 1.5. Its goal was no more than 2 degrees and ideally 1.5. But in the nature of the way that each COP tries to improve on the previous commitments, by about 2017, the 2 degrees, which was clearly going to be surpassed, the 2 degrees gave way to 1.5. And certainly at Sunex Malta, we are using Paris 1.5 as the element and not an ideally to achieve 1.5. And if you look forward to 2030, the first red dot here, that's when the SDGs are supposed to finalize and achieve their targets. And that's why we are talking about a sustainability plan in Sunex Malta. Our vision is that companies who join the registry will eventually file a climate action plan and a sustainability action plan. The sustainability action plan is geared to 2030, and the climate action plan, with way stations in 2030, 2040, is geared to 2050. And that's actually the second red dot you see on this slide, which somehow I screwed up in transforming. So there you have it. This was a man who for 30 or 40 years was behind almost every environmental initiative on the planet, who was directly involved in building the biggest of the initiatives, and who I'm proud to say became my friend for 25 years. And we worked together, we traveled around the world together, we appeared on conference platforms together. I was involved in his company in China. I looked after the tourism component of it. And we became firm friends. And I wanted to give you a vision of Maurice Strong. That's why we created Sunex, to continue this vision. That's why we engaged with the government of Malta. And Malta has been a wonderful home to Sunex. Leslie Vella, who's chairman of Sunex and who's the deputy head of the Malta Tourism Administration, was the prime architect in helping make this happen, and is actively involved in helping us to bring this vision of Strong's into Malta's 2030 strategy, which we will be looking at in more detail in future lessons. And actually within that strategy, there are 2 or 3 clauses which specifically refer to climate-friendly travel. And these will be the clauses that we use as we go out over the next years to build this concept into other countries, and where you, as graduates, will have the opportunity to become the central point in those countries, helping us to engage with all of the local stakeholders and to craft a concept for those countries and the cities and the communities within them and the travel sector, which will be unique to each country. But they'll have a common denominator of they will all be aiming for Paris 1.5 and the relevant SDGs. So I want to end there. I think we can have a discussion now on Maurice Strong, the man, what he put in place, his vision, and how you can pick this up and take it back into your home communities when you've completed this course.